So we're joined here by Ed Johnson, who is co-founder of Umbo, 2018 Speech Pathologist of the Year, Chairman of the Board of SARA, the Rural Allied Health Board, PhD candidate, 2021 Westpac Scholar. Have I missed anything?
Yeah, that's plenty. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah. I thought that would embarrass you a bit. So yeah, I mean, I guess just introduce yourself if you can. Thanks a lot for coming, and just let everyone know who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, sure. I'm Ed Johnson, and I'm a speech pathologist, and I've been working as a speech pathologist for 10 years now. I have worked all my career in rural and remote areas, trying to help predominantly people with disabilities and mental illnesses with their communication, and speech pathologists also help with safe eating and drinking, because we know all about head and neck and all that kind of thing. So that kind of falls in our remit. So I do a bit of that too. In 2018, I co-founded Umbo, as you said, Jack, and we are a digital health service provider. We provide services to people mainly in rural and remote areas to get them services where they couldn't get services before. We do speech pathology and occupational therapy. So speech pathology is, like I said, communication and eating, drinking. Occupational therapy is about basically learning how to, for kids, learning how to play, learning how to run, jump, catch, throw, write, read, all those kinds of things, like play skills that turn into life skills later on. And within an adult context, that's more things like learning how to plan to spend your money, learning how to move safely around if you have mobility issues, learning how to process sensory experiences safely and comfortably.
Yeah, that's a good summary. So obviously Umbo works primarily in rural areas. So I guess obviously we kind of touched on, I think we'll probably know why, just in terms of the excess waiting times, but what is the general experience that a rural family would typically face compared to, say, a family in like Metro Sydney or Melbourne?
Yeah, so allied health is very broad kind of a term, and a term that a lot of people don't necessarily recognise. But allied health, I'll just say to start off with, because I'll keep using the term, is basically health professionals who aren't nurses or doctors. So it's very broad, and a lot of people dispute who is allied health and who isn't. But for the purposes of this, we'll say it's not nurses or doctors. So there's a lot of different professions in that. There's physio, OT, speech, psychology, pharmacy. And it means we have a very diverse workforce, and some of those disciplines have very small workforces. The further out west you go, if you're on the east coast at least, the further out west you go, the fewer people in each of those disciplines we have. So it's much more difficult for people to get services. And when there are services around, there's usually a long waiting list. So there's in Western New South Wales, there's waiting lists around about 18 months. That's a typical wait time to see a speech pathologist or an OT. And if you're talking about early intervention, there's an issue identified with a child, and mum and dad really want help with speech, OT, physio, whatever it might be. That child's 3 years old. That's and you're waiting 18 months. That's another 50% of their lifetime that they're waiting for that service. So that's really critical, and the literature says that the earlier you get in to help those people, the better. So There's huge distances that people have to travel. There are huge barriers in terms of funding. People don't have a lot of money often. Um, they come from low socioeconomic backgrounds often. There's a disproportionate amount of low socioeconomic background in rural Australia as compared with metro areas. So it means that we've got kind of this perfect storm of barriers that people are facing with a lack of workforce or an unskilled workforce, or huge waiting times, big travel times, and often not enough money for them to be able to pay for a service, even if it is there.
Ed, has there been a push from the government to get more professionals out there, rather than just obviously focusing on the metro areas? We know the rural areas are underfunded, under-resourced, a whole lot more than that. But is there any initiatives from the government to get more professionals out there?
I think there's a few kind of smaller initiatives to try to promote early childhood development in these areas, but there's no systematic kind of nationwide approach to trying to improve the allied health workforce, or grow the allied health workforce so that there are people out there who can service families. In terms of funding mechanisms, there's the NDIS, which provides people funding to access these kinds of services. But a big barrier to that is people's knowledge of the NDIS. Some people don't even know the NDIS exists. They might have a child with a disability, and they also might be in an area where there aren't any services, so they can't spend that money that they've been given by the government to spend on these kinds of services. They might not be aware that there are digital platforms like Umbo or others which can provide services remotely. There's also a sort of a bit of I suppose a great opportunity for solution in terms of building up an allied health assistant workforce, where you might have someone who's a certificate qualified health professional in a community who is working under the direction and support of a number of different allied health professions who can help coach people in their community about, they can coach them through therapy, they can give them therapeutic supports in that context without there having to be someone there. So, but it's not systematically funded by the government, and there's some important advocacy work that is being done over many years, which is slowly raising the profile of allied health, I'd say, because so much of the funding goes into GPs and nursing, but they're not recognising the fact that we can prevent allied health prevents illness and disability, and prevents disability becoming a bigger impact on people's lives. So the knowledge amongst government about the fact that allied health can do that and the role that they play in prevention or mitigation of disability is something that is increasing but isn't quite there yet. But once it gets there, I reckon we'll get a more kind of systematic approach to funding and supporting allied health service provision.
Yeah. So where do kind of people in the community, and in particular early childhood educators, where do they fit into this kind of early childhood, early intervention stage?
Yeah, good question. I see early childhood educators as being the kind of they're the experts in that child's life to an extent. I mean, there's parents there as well, but often as therapists, we're working directly with early childhood educators. We're working with them because they know so much about the overall development of the child. They know what the child likes. They know how they make friends. They know how to implement, developmental supports for these kids. They can be there on a consistent basis to monitor how they're going, and the strengths and weaknesses and the successes and failures that child's having. So at Umbo, we take a coaching approach, and that works through the therapist coaching a key worker. So a key worker could be an early childhood educator, someone working in class with that child, and then we would coach them in the identified area that child needed support in. And then rather than it being, half an hour a week that this child's doing therapy, it's many, many hours a week, because that early childhood educator then has the skills specifically in that, that specific area. Say whether it, as a speech pathologist, I might try to teach some sign language to a child if their speech or their verbal language isn't developing as quickly as others. Then I might coach the early childhood educator in that, and then they might be able to use that all week with that child to help that child in their context, help reduce frustration, get clearer communication happening between everyone. But also what it's doing is upskilling the early childhood educator, because then they might see another child and say, hey, this kid's getting frustrated too because no one understands him. Let's try a couple of signs with this kid. Lo and behold, you get some successes there, and the child gets less frustrated, and then you've got more skills in that context. So the fact that early childhood educators are there and supporting consistently and have such a great understanding of the individual situation of the child is just vital.
Ed, on the topic of early intervention, obviously, there are parents out there are educators out there who sometimes go down the path of, let's see how they go, let's see how they develop, let's give them another 6 months, 12 months, whatever the case might be. What is your experience in terms of early intervention compared to, say, waiting 6, 12, 24 months from now? Like, what do you see as a side effect if you wait long compared to, getting in there early and rectifying the issue?
Yeah, the literature says it all, really. It basically says the earlier you get in there to start helping, the better the outcomes, in not just in the short term, but really in the long term. Because from my experience as a speech pathologist, if we're talking about something like a speech sound disorder that starts showing itself, at 1.5, 2 years of age, then that person might not get intervention until they're 5 at school. They might not then fall behind with reading and writing and literacy stuff, because it's closely connected to your speech sound production. And then they might get to high school and they're still a little bit behind, so they disengage. They focus more on causing trouble or stirring things up, because they're not kind of really engaging in class, because they're still at that little bit of a step behind. So it really is a kick-on effect from when you are very young, when you encounter these kinds of developmental issues, and that to me says that that says how important it is to be able to get to these issues early. And that's not to say that we need to go around labeling everyone and say, you've got a problem, you've got a problem, you've got a problem. We can't do that, especially if we don't have the people there to support them. If we go around and give people a whole lot of tests and say you've got a problem, and then there's no speech therapist there to help, then we've done them a disservice. But I think the coaching method that I told you about before, that really gets the people around the child, who are around them every day, to be more aware of those kinds of issues and have some strategies, at least, even if they're not specifically targeted to that child, to be able to continue their development while they wait for services, if they do have a longer waiting period. But I would say get in there and start working with someone as early as you can. because that's where you're going to have the most impact.
So, on the topic of early childhood educators being involved in the identifying the developmental delays, what advice would you give to educators who maybe are thinking, well, I don't really know much, and I don't even know much about the services that are offered, and maybe kind of not feeling well placed to refer or confident to refer? What advice would you give to them in terms of aid in that process and kind of being a bit more confident with it?
I think there's some really good resources that you can get online. There's checklists of developmental milestones. There's also apps you can use on your phone that are probably even easier. And if it's a younger worker, then often they're a bit more tech savvy, or tech is a bit more attractive to them. So you can look up, for example, the Center for Disease Control milestone checklists from the US. Use a US app and a US checklist, but it's still relevant to Aussie kids as well, and plenty of kids around the place, because it's not it's only up to about 5 years that they usually go. So that's a really useful thing to have. You can go through there and you can tick boxes and it'll tell you if that person's on track or not. And then it usually gives you suggestions of what you can do to keep them on track or get them on track. So it doesn't necessarily say, you've got to know about physio, you've got to know about speech, you've got to know about OT. And then you've got to know what each one of those people does, and then you've got to know if your child, if they're having difficulties with whatever it is, running, jumping, toileting, anything like that, then who do I refer to and how do I refer to them? Basically, it means that you just go through this checklist. You've got some strategies there at the end to help them through it. And then I would recommend talking with the director at the Early Childhood Service, because they usually have a wealth of experience in tracking the development of kids. They're often the people who are helping to fill out and analyse developmental checklists at the start of the year as well, to track kids' goals and track kids' development. But if you want to learn more as an individual, I would say that the CDC milestone tracker is a really good place to start.
Yeah, and then so in terms of referring to the services, obviously that like that's some great advice for educators. But in your line of work with online therapy, how would you kind of approach someone who maybe wasn't aware of the efficacy of telehealth, as people call it?
Yeah, it's a conversation that we have to have continuously, and that's fine, because it's a thing that's new in a lot of people's lives. And what I usually do with people who I work with is that I have that conversation on the phone. I might say, this is the service we provide. This is usually how we do it. I talk about the coaching model and using key workers to coach them so that they can work directly with the child and support them directly, and then make sure that I can answer any questions about how it actually works. So there are practice guidelines that are published in the literature about what a successful telepractice service is, and they include going through a proof of concept phase with the people, with the clients, which is, talking through, this is how it works, this is how I use it. In your situation, this might be what we do, and this is the kind of goal that we're looking for. So it's a collaboration and an ongoing kind of, I suppose, open conversation about the strengths and limitations in that particular circumstance with that particular client, that helps to allay a lot of those fears in most cases, I've found.
On the topic of telehealth, Ed, is there obviously it's different from seeing someone face to face. Like, what are the challenges for you in terms of doing stuff online on a Zoom session compared to say face to face with the patient, so to speak?
So it's tricky to start with usually because a lot of people think about it as kind of just plonking someone down in front of the screen and then me trying to do the therapy directly with them. And especially, the younger you get with your clients, the more difficult that is to do. So that's a challenge that people kind of immediately bring up. They say, how do you get them to sit down? But usually what I'm doing is trying to view the surroundings, look at the context where they are, So if they've, if you've identified the child's, their play skills aren't fantastic and they can't introduce themselves to children at preschool, what I might do with you is I might get you on the video, I might talk to you, and I might try to figure out, that's the issue. And then what we might do then is we might pick up the laptop or the iPad or whatever, and we might follow the child around the room and see what they're doing. So doing things creatively like that and coaching people rather than trying to keep people sat down there. That's kind of one of the challenges that I've faced and solved in most cases. But I think it's really attitudinal challenges that are the hardest. We can solve the kind of the logistical stuff, seeing where someone is in the room or keeping them seated or that kind of thing with help at the other end. But it really is that if people come to telepractice with an open mind about what we can do and how we can do it together and getting involved rather than just thinking of it as a screen-to-screen interaction, as simple as that, then usually we get through most of those challenges. But really, it is it can be a little bit isolating. It can be difficult to understand people's communities as much as you would if you were there in person. So as much as I can, I try to make sure that I do discover the community with them, and I do talk with them about, where they're from and where I'm from, and try to connect with them on that human basis that you really get with an in-person service.
Yeah, I think you've definitely sold telehealth to a lot of people, I feel. If you could leave educators with one tip in the realm of early intervention, what would it be?
Don't wait to refer, and don't wait to start helping your kids if there isn't a therapist around. There are heaps of resources, like I think the CDC milestone checker that gives you the tips about what to do. Get in there and do some stuff with your kids if you're worried at all about their development. So play with them directly, talk with them on their level, and make sure that you're giving them as many opportunities as you can to have new experiences wherever you're working, whether that's playing with different kids, doing different kind of arts and crafts, different sensory experiences, communicating with different people. Get them out there and get them experiencing as many different things as you can.
Before I let you go, is there a stigma in terms of a child's developmental delay, so to speak? Obviously, they talk about stigma with mental health and whatnot. Do you see that with a childhood's development as well, in terms of parents not admitting to it or afraid or ashamed of it and so forth? Do you see that?
Yeah, every day I see that. We have so little understanding, I think, in the general community about what developmental delays are and how they happen. And that's a big part of the work that I do when I'm working with early intervention clients, trying to talk with the family about the fact that it is not their fault. It isn't their fault, and these things happen. And one interesting statistic from a speech pathology point of view is that 1 in 5 kids starts primary school with some sort of communication delay or disorder, or having had some sort of communication delay or disorder. That's a huge number. That's 20% of the population. So if you're worried, if you're a parent who's concerned about anything at all, it's best to get help. It's best to kind of let us know, because we can't help you otherwise. It is a traumatic thing for a lot of parents, and whether it's a speech disorder, whether it's a medical diagnosis of some sort of disability, cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or something like that. There's a grieving process that goes through that parents go through, where they do blame themselves, but it's not their fault, and it's really important for them to be able to be confident enough to come and ask for help. And Allied Health are there to help, and so are early childhood educators. And the best thing you can do is to reach out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, thank you so much for speaking to us. I think educators and families alike will get so much value from this. If someone was to be looking for some advice or some help from either Umbo or yourself, where would they need to go?
Sure. You can jump on our website at umbo.com.au or email us at hello@umbo.com.au. On our website, you can look at our training packages if you're a clinician or early childhood worker. You can also have a look at referrals and getting in touch with us about therapy if you're a parent or someone who's looking to refer someone to our services.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Ed, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed, for joining.
Thank you.